Um, Pleased to introduce Harold Tuckfield, who will be talking to us tonight about the relationship between San Francisco and Hawaii between 1876 and 1916. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. So, as I mentioned, I'll be speaking about the close commercial and cultural relationship between San Francisco and Hawaii over a 40-year period from 1876 to 1916. You may wonder, why this topic? Why this obscure topic? Well, I'm a student of San Francisco history, as a number of you also are, and I spent a lot of time in Hawaii on various trips and was studying the history of Hawaii and saw all these kind of connections that had never been connected up before. So I tried to make a blockchain out of it, and hence this presentation. So in terms of scope, I'm going to talk about a tale of two cities, San Francisco and Honolulu, plus some sugarcane plantations on Maui. Some strong personalities, Klaus Spreckels, the sugar magnate from San Francisco, and David Kalakaua, the king of Hawaii. Plus, the game of poker enters into this relationship. Plus, lots of photos of really, really cool looking ships. So let's start with the historical setting before the start of this really strong relationship. So as all of you know, Hawaii is very centrally located in the Pacific and was a very attractive coaling station that a lot of navies, had in their had strong interest in the late 1800s, and also location where a number of whalers went to provision. This story that I'll be telling will take place mostly in Honolulu and also on the island of Maui up here near Kahului, where the airport now is. So we start with David Kalakaua, King of Hawaii, 1874 to 1891. Absolutely devoted to the welfare and culture of Native Hawaiians. Very interested in modernizing his kingdom. He was a very convivial guy who used to love to hold luau's and sing at them, play the ukulele. He was also known as the Merry Monarch. He built the Iolani Palace, which you can now see in downtown Honolulu, which was the palace where the royals lived, and the large statue of King Kamehameha, which is, I believe, outside the Hawaii State Building. So a lot of good qualities, but also an extravagant spender, and never saw a European ceremony or gift that he didn't like. Here's a picture of the Iolani Palace that David Kalakaua built, 1882 to 1883. And this is the building that still exists that you can visit. David Kalakaua actually visited the White House and met with President Grant on December 12, 1874. And here we see Grant and a very tall and thin David Kalakaua, which unfortunately he wasn't able to maintain that thinness. The trigger for the San Francisco relationship was the Reciprocity Treaty of 1876 between the United States and Kingdom of Hawaii. This basically lifted tariffs on a number of different products of Hawaii so they could come into the United States, in essence, duty-free or at a small tax rate. Most important on that list was sugar, and this brought prosperity to Hawaii. In this picture I'm showing, you see David Kalakaua seated in the center. To the left, John Owen Dominus, who was married to David Kalakaua's sister, Liliuokalani, who later became queen. And King Kalakaua basically directed this committee in the negotiations. So, as I mentioned, King Kalakaua was very interested in trying to modernize the kingdom, and he took a trip around the world in 1881. He was away for 281 days. He was trying to encourage importation of contract workers to the Hawaiian plantations, which were growing really fast at that point after the Reciprocity Treaty. Also wanted to bring attention of world leaders to Hawaii. But this had a negative effect also. And here is a article from the WASP, which was, I believe, a San Francisco publication, showing this kind of negative view of he's trying to kind of auction off the kingdom to the largest bidder, and take profit himself. And we see different depictions of world leaders, and also His Royal Saccharinity, Klaus Spreckels sitting on a box of sugar. On his return trip, he actually visited President Chester Arthur and Thomas Edison. Kalakaua was very, very interested in new inventions. Upon his return, he saw how in the royal courts of Europe, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance, and how coronations were a really big deal. So he decided he wanted a coronation, even after the fact. This is from April 1883, the Illustrated London News. He went to San Francisco a number of different times. Here he is visiting for the last time on the USS Charleston in 1890. Here he is seated in the white pants where my arrow is showing. And here we see some of the ship's mates, captain and such. And unfortunately, he never returned. He died of a stroke in the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, January 20th, 1891. And here we see a wonderful depiction of the old palace, which was destroyed in the earthquake of April 18th, 1906. After he died childless. His sister, Liliuokalani, became Queen of Hawaii, 1891 to 1893. She was overthrown. She was a believer in the power of the monarchy and absolute power of monarchs, and was trying to reverse a constitution that was giving some more power to some of the business community. And there was a vigilante group formed that did a coup d'etat called the Committee of Safety, primarily descendants of U.S. missionaries that favored U.S. annexation and included a number of haole or white lawyers and businessmen. It's sometimes been said in Hawaii that the missionaries came to Hawaii to do good, and their descendants did well monetarily. So a coup d'etat by a small group actually, stormed the palace, took over. This was led by Henry E. Cooper and Lauren Thurston. And then for good measure, they called John L. Stevens, the U.S. diplomat in Honolulu, where we see the picture right here. He was an annexationalist also, favored annexation. And the Committee of Safety basically said that, we really need, we're concerned about disorder in the streets. Can you send the Marines in? So that's just what John L. Stevens did. He sent the Marines from the USS Boston, which happened to be in Honolulu Harbor. And here we see on the left some of the Marines from the USS Boston. And in essence, they kept order and kept the coup d'etat in place. A provisional government was formed January 17th, 1893. Here we see a picture of that cabinet. And then the Republic of Hawaii was declared in 1894. What I love about these pictures is this really cool beard. Look at Samuel Sanford Dole and look at him here. That is a beard to admire. Here we see the troops of the Republic of Hawaii. So the United States at this particular time had a growing interest in Hawaii for obvious reasons. Manifest Destiny had kind of closed on the continent. The West had been won, and Manifest Destiny had been declared to be over by some writers in 1890. Also, there was an interest in expanding beyond the continent. Also, there was a search for a base for the growing Navy, and troops were staging for for the Philippines from the Spanish-American War. So the sequence of events was first, the U.S. obtained exclusive rights to use Pearl Harbor as a coaling and repair station. This was for a renewal of the Reciprocity Treaty. Then, as I mentioned, there was the Coup d'etat, 1893. Then a treaty of annexation was negotiated with President Benjamin Harrison that was sent to the Senate for approval. And then there was a change of presidency, and it was rejected by President Grover Cleveland, who kind of saw that this was kind of a coup d'etat by Americans in Hawaii to try to get Hawaii annexed by the United States. After Grover Cleveland term ended, McKinley signed a treaty to annex the Republic of Hawaii. However, that failed because it required a 2/3 supporting vote in the Senate. Then a monumental event, the Spanish-American War from April 21st to August 13th, 1898. The Republic of Hawaii was a strong supporter of the United States in this war, and its value was demonstrated as a naval base and also a place for staging troops. As a result, in July of 1898, the Newlands Resolution was passed, which called for a joint resolution to annex Hawaii and required only a simple majority from both houses of Congress. So here is a very interesting cartoon showing Uncle Sam, at the dinner table, and here we have McKinley as the waiter, and it's very easy to tell McKinley in caricatures based on his nose here. And Uncle Sam is saying, "Well, I hardly know what to try first: the Cuba steak, the Puerto Rican meat, Philippines floating islands, or the Sandwich Islands or Hawaii." So this was a cartoon during the Spanish-American War. So after the Newland Resolution was passed, U.S. annexation occurred on August 12, 1898, and the territory of Hawaii was declared April 30th, 1890. Here we see celebration in the streets by a lot of Americans from the business community, a lot of foreign businessmen too, that liked the stability that annexation would provide, a good environment for business. It was a sad day for the former monarchy and Native Hawaiians. So the Spanish-American War and its aftermath, Honolulu was a stopover point for U.S. forces being shipped from San Francisco to the Philippines. Here we see a tent camp on the grounds of the Presidio during the Spanish-American War, and troops were first sent from the Presidio to the Philippines, and then after a couple of days or a couple of weeks, then they would go off to the Philippines. Now we go into the strong connection from San Francisco, Hawaii, from an economic standpoint, based on Klaus Freckles' sugar empire. I call it King Sugar and his outside influence in Hawaii. So Klaus Freckles was a sugar magnate. He owned plantations, sugar refineries, shipping, bank, newspaper, merchandising stores. He was strong, he was an innovator, and was incredibly arrogant. Here is Freckles' mansion that was in San Francisco on Van Ness Avenue. It was heavily damaged in the earthquake, and I think it was taken down in the 1920s. So Klaus Freckles became a whiskey drinking, card playing, and lender of money for the monarchy. He and Kalakaua had a great relationship, smoking cigars, drinking, and playing cards. But most importantly, loaning lots of money to Kalakaua. And here is one of his first loans of $40,000 in 1878. And that's equivalent to about $1.1 million now. Now, Freckles came actually on the same ship that announced the Reciprocity Treaty of 1876. And at one point, Kalakaua owned 50% of the national debt of Hawaii from all his loans. So initially, Freckles got the rights to this land up near Kahului, and water rights, and eventually got the land. But the problem was it was just a dry plains. So he had to build a big irrigation ditch from Haleakala all the way down to Kahului. I think it's somewhere around 40 miles. This was completed in 1880. And how did he do it? He turned to San Francisco, to Herman Schussler, chief engineer of the Spring Valley Waterworks Company, who basically managed the digging of that irrigation ditch and lining of it. And he is also very well known as the engineer on the Crystal Springs Reservoir. And here we see a monument to him that you can see located in the Crystal Springs Reservoir. Also, Freckles wanted to build a sugar mill. And where did he go for that? The Lisbon Iron Works in San Francisco. They designed and built the Frecklesville Sugar Mill in 1885. So the plantation and the town that grew up around it, was called Frecklesville. Not too hard to understand if you understand Klaus Freckles' ego. And so here is a painting of Japanese laborers on the Freckles plantation. It's an oil painting from 1885. And if you ever go to Maui, to the Sugar Museum, you'll see it hanging there, the original. So here is what the Frecklesville mill looked like in 1890. It was the largest in the world and one of the first places to have outdoor lighting. And some of the monarchy used to come just to see the spectacle of this, at night, all lit up and all the operations going on. Here on the right, we see Frecklesville today. Kind of very pastoral, vacation place, expensive real estate. Now I take a pause to something that's hopefully really interesting to the club. Here is an undocumented copper token with the H, C, and S, which may be Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar Company, which was the company started by Klaus Spreckels. In a blog by the Hawaiian numismatist, 2014, this really hasn't been validated. More research needs to be done. In fact, maybe I should ask a question of the audience. Does anybody know anything about this particular token?
I don't, but I have a question. Do you know where it was found?
I don't know. I don't know. All I saw was just the photo of it.
That's a key piece of information. If it's found, near Spreckles' property, then that would help reinforce this attribution.
That's true. That's true. Actually, I'm going to take a look. So, good question. Now, here we have some Kahului Railroad tokens. So, a railroad was built to take the sugar cane to the port of Kahului, and included the Spreckels plantation. And it was issued by Thomas Hobron, who was, I believe, a postmaster in Kahului and then became the railroad owner. Here we see his tokens, THH, used to pay railroad workers and could be redeemed at his general store. And was also circulated more broadly in Hawaii. 1879, there was a 12.5 cent and a 25 cent denomination. 1891, a number of different denominations. Anyone in the club have any of these or have any additional information? Okay.
I would just note, Harold, that the denominations there make an interesting jump because the earlier ones are denominated in the bits that are common for Spanish reals, and the later ones are denominated in the decimal system.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the 12.5 cent comes up in a couple of different places. And in fact, I believe there was a stamp issued that was 12.5 cents too during the Hawaii Republic. So the sugar was refined to a certain point, but not to the fineness of final sugar. And it was shipped to the refinery in San Francisco, located below, owned by none other than Klaus Spreckels. And this was also the largest in the world. And it was at the foot of Potrero Hill. So now we get to stuff of real good interest. The Hawaiian coins dated 1883 that were minted in San Francisco, November 1883 to June 1884, and arranged by none other than Klaus Spreckels. So the way the story goes was after Kalakawa's trip to around the world into the royal courts of Europe, he saw that the other monarchs had coins that had portraits of them, and Kalakaua didn't want to be left out. And he also thought it would kind of modernize things in the kingdom, and instead of using US coins and coins of other countries, to use Hawaiian coins. And so here we see a dime, a quarter, $50, and $1. Anyone in the club have these?
I do.
Okay, which ones do you have?
All of them.
Good. I have all of them too. The dollar.
The dime.
Pardon?
I have a few made into jewelry also.
Oh,
Bought the dime a long time ago at a good auction.
Huh.
I only have a quarter, unfortunately.
I have them all.
Yeah, I have them all too. The dollar is particularly hard to find uncleaned. And I've seen several PCDS certified dollars that have been obviously cleaned. And they're kind of pricey. I think, you know, in very fine to extremely fine condition, somewhere in the 500 to 1,000 range. Although I bought mine a number of years ago. Now let's talk about the story of these coins. So if you collect US barber dimes, barber quarters, barber halves, and are a barber collector, you should collect these coins because the chief engraver was Charles Barber. And Hawaiian law had called for the coins of identical size and weight and finest US coins. Originally, they had planned a 12.5-cent coin before they made this decision. And it was withdrawn, but a few of them got made. So Spreckles, so the story goes is Kalakaua then invited representatives of several mints in Europe to and converse with them about making coins for him. Spreckles heard about it, went to the king and said, David, now look, most of your trade is with the United States. And so you really want coins that meet the specifications of American coins. And look, I can arrange this for you. You know, I know the mint. I located in San Francisco. Okay, you want $1 million worth of coins in terms of the denominations totaling to $1 million? I'll take care of it for you. And that he did. And he supplied the bullion to the mint for about 850,000. There was a 17,500 mint fee, 2,500 for the designs, and $250,000 for the, well, I think it was $250 for the dies. And so all in all, he made a profit about $130,000 on this $1 million contract as his fee for arranging this whole thing. So here we see the denominations, the circulation, the number of proofs, melted down, net distribution. What's really notable here is looking at the numbers of half dollars and dollars that have been melted down. $50 out of a circulation base of 700,000, 612,000 have been melted down. For the dollar, 500,000 that were meant for circulation, 453,000 were melted down. There is 20 proofs of the 12.5 cent that were made that go for somewhat handsome sums with too many zeros for me on it in auction occasionally. Any questions on these?
Yeah, it was my understanding that the larger denominations, when they canceled their value, you could trade in for a fairly reasonable premium against the value of the coin. But the dime was so close to the value of trade-in that many of the Hawaiians held on to them as a keepsake, so to speak, and a great deal of them got made into jewelry.
Yeah.
The only one I don't see here is the penny, which is the one that I have a hard time.
Yes, that's from 1847, if I recall.
Yeah.
That wasn't during the Kalakaua period. Yeah.
No.
Just, you know, talking more, you know, about this close relation with San Francisco, you know, kind of starting with the Reciprocity Treaty, 1876. But yeah, the penny is kind of nice, although supposedly it wasn't very successful because it was hard to do business on large sums with just pennies. By the way, these weren't weren't very well accepted in Hawaii at the time when they were shipped. And actually, I believe that Klaus Spreckels started a bank, and that bank circulated them. It was like a large amount of money that suddenly hit the market. So oftentimes when Spreckels would come, they would meet at the boathouse on the Honolulu waterfront. And here we see his boathouse. And Kalakaua had many luau's, played cards with Spreckels here, drank. And the end of the close relationship happened in 1886 over a game of cards. So at the time, there was an American admiral, a British admiral, Klaus Spreckels, the king, and his entourage, all in the boathouse, playing cards, drinking, smoking cigars. They're playing a game of euchre, which is a 5-card game. And Spreckels said to the group after one of the hands, said, "You know what? If this were a game of poker, I would win." And one of the admirals says, "Well, I've got 3 aces." Klaus Spreckels says, "I've got 4 kings." And then when Kalakaua heard that, he said, show me your 4 kings. But there are only 3 in the hand. And Kalakaua said, "Where's your 4th king?" And Spreckels said, "Well, I'm the 4th king." So that may have been meant as, well, I'm the sugar king, or it could have been meant, I've lent you so much money, Kalakaua, I'm kind of the king. In any case, it was taken extremely badly by Kalakaua, who just threw down cards, left with his entourage, and immediately got on the telegraph to London financiers to try to figure out a way of repaying Spreckels' loans. And that was kind of the end of that close relationship that Spreckels had with the king. So now let's talk about the role of the other Spreckels sons in this Hawaiian sugar connection. And I think you can all remember, we're all of the same vintage, I think, the show All in the Family. So first we have John Spreckels, who founded the Oceanic Steamship Company in San Francisco in 1881, which transported passengers, sugar, and other food and cargoes and mail between different destinations in the Pacific, including Hawaii. Eventually sold this to Matson Lines in 1926, but here we have a really nice poster advertising the steamship company, and you can see that it was located on Market Street in San Francisco. By the way, John Spreckels, after the 1906 earthquake, relocated to San Diego and became a big financier there of San Diego, and actually built the Coronado, was one of the major financiers of the Coronado Hotel down there. Here, by the way, is one of the ships of the Oceanic Steamship Company, a really cool looking steamer here. And here is a, I think this is either the Mariposa or the Alameda. And here I found this really cool envelope that was postmarked in 1890, and it was sent via the Alameda to the Spreckels brothers, in other words, to the steamship company. And here we see these stamps of David Kalakaua on it, Hawaiian stamps. Here's another picture of one of their ships, the Mariposa. So then we have Adolf Spreckels. So Adolf Spreckels was the second oldest son, a VP of the Spreckels Sugar Company. He was one of the vice presidents of the Oceanic Steamship Company, but also interesting, he was president of the San Francisco and San Mateo Electric Railway. And the Spreckels Company was a public company, and its stock went up and down, was pretty volatile. And Michael DeYoung, one of the founders of the San Francisco Chronicle, had alleged that there was fraud involved with some of these volatile swings, especially down, price going down. And they got into an argument, and Adolf Spreckels followed Michael DeYoung back to his office on November 19th, 1884, and shot him. Michael DeYoung survived, and Michael DeYoung himself went on to, I think, shoot somebody else himself. And what do you think happened to Adolf Spreckels? Any guesses after he shot Michael DeYoung?
Nothing at all?
Close. Acquitted based on temporary insanity plea. And one of the thoughts was that Michael DeYoung was one of the most hated people in San Francisco amongst businessmen and companies, because he wrote trash about everybody. And there was a thought that maybe the judge himself hated Michael DeYoung and let Spreckels off as a result. By the way, Spreckels is also the name for the moniker Sugar Daddy that his wife Alma Spreckels used to refer to him as. First off, he was involved in sugar. He was a daddy, like a big rich guy to a much younger woman, and in the sugar business. So that's where Sugar Daddy came from, Alma Spreckels. So we talked about the Spreckels. Let's go on to William Matson, founder of the Matson lines. Also arguably a Spreckels creation, as I'll explain. So Matson, born in Sweden, orphaned at a young age, set upon a life on the sea, cabin boy initially, came to San Francisco in 1867. He came to the attention of Spreckels because he owned a barge that was taking coal from Mount Diablo and shipping it to the Spreckels sugar refinery in San Francisco. And he was invited to work aboard the Spreckels family yacht as the captain. Here was Spreckels' yacht called the Lurleen. And by the way, there is a street in San Francisco named Lurleen. And what a beautiful ship this was that William Matson captained for the Spreckels. Matson's first ship in 1882 was named the Emma Claudina, named after one of Klaus Spreckels' daughters. And Spreckels advanced Matson $20,000 to buy it, which is about $519K today. And the Emma Claudina sailed from San Francisco with merchandise principally for the plantation stores on Maui and returned with cane sugar for the refineries. And Klaus Spreckels actually financed a number of the purchases of Matson ships. Matson was also an innovator. He converted a coal-burning ship to oil and had the first oil-burning steamer in the Pacific, which we see here, the Enterprise. And he incorporated his shipping business in 1901, became president. And here is his building in San Francisco, his also known as the Matson Building, completed in 1924 and remained the company headquarters until October 1967, where they moved to the East Bay, the Matson lines. So over time, there was a growth of tourist service from Hawaii. And there became increased interest in it. And the first Matson ship was the SS Wilhelmina, purchased in 1910. And then Matson purchased the Oceanic Steamship Company in 1926 and the Los Angeles Steamship Company in 1931. In 1927, you had 9 Matson ships offering 7 trips to Hawaii from San Francisco and Seattle every month for only $270. But I wouldn't get too excited. $270 back then is about $4,110 today. Here we see a picture on the right of the SS Malolo, built in 1927, and the largest and most palatial luxury cruise liner built in the United States at that time. So another connection between Hawaii and San Francisco is the California Midwinter International Exposition, 1894, in Golden Gate Park. And the Hawaiian Pavilion offered firelight and dancing. And to keep club members awake, here we have the so-called dollar that was issued as a souvenir at the California Midwinter Expo. Anyone have one of those?
Mhm.
Yes?
Oh, yeah.
I have 2 die trials of that metal.
Oh, wonderful. I'm still looking to buy one. So here we see a view of the Midwinter Expo in Golden Gate Park from Strawberry Hill.
They were all talented. You know, I can't get her to talk about it.
Hello?
What?
He doesn't want to talk about it.
Someone have a comment or? Here we have the Hawaiian exhibit, and it featured Native Hawaiian dancers. And there was some real concern and a committee of morality that roamed the California Midwinter Expo, a society for morality. And they spent a lot of time around the Hawaiian Pavilion. Some say to kind of express concern and make sure that the hula dances were proper. Others say they just enjoyed the dancing and enjoyed looking at the dancers. Inside, we see, here's the throne of the thrones from the monarchy and some furniture from the monarchy. What's interesting is this is 1894. This is after the provisional government took over. And I'm not sure whether it was royalists that sponsored this exhibit or just the provisional government thought, okay, what else are we going to do with this stuff? Let's ship it to the expo for people to gawk at. But the real attraction was the simulated volcano, fire and lights, recreation of the Kilauea volcano. And by the way, this exhibit was shipped down from the Columbian Exposition of 1893, and Michael DeYoung was one of the directors of that. And at the end of the Columbian Exposition, you had all these different exhibits, and what do you do with them? He thought, well, look at what the Columbian Exposition has done for the city of Chicago in terms of commerce and attracting publicity. Let's do the same thing in San Francisco, and we'll call it the California Midwinter Expo. And he had a number of the exhibits carted down from Chicago, and this is one of them. Another connection between San Francisco and Hawaii is an actual physical connection, the Great Pacific Cable, linking San Francisco and Honolulu in 1902. Here we see the laying of the cable, which was an underground telegraph cable. Here we see Cliff House. Here we see this crowd here, looking at the laying of the cable. So this was buried. I think this is the cable here, I think. And when it was completed, I believe the first message that was from the president to Hawaii at the time, the state government of Hawaii, because the cable was then connected to other cables across the United States. So now we go to the Pan-Pacific Expo, 1915. And here is a beautiful depiction. I wish mine were in as good a shape as this, and the $50 that was minted. Anyone have the $50?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, I have one too. Anyone have the dollar, the gold dollar?
I have one of those too.
Okay, now the big question, the $50.
I had a roll of those in the basement. I can't find them.
Okay. I'm not even sure I've ever seen one other than the picture. So let's look at Hawaii at the Pan-Pacific Exposition. So when this was happening, Hawaii was a territory, and the Chamber of Commerce thought, we should be represented at this great expo, and a great way of exhibiting and advertising Hawaii. And so they went to an Oakland architect to design a pavilion, and they designed this. Nothing very Hawaiian about it. It's French ornate architecture. Now, there at the Palace of Horticulture, there was an area here where you can have tea, sample delicious pineapple, and island coffee, I assume Kona coffee. And then you have ukulele players and hula dancers. And by the way, Kona coffee from the Big Island also has a Bay Area connection, that the person who founded Kona coffee, I think around the mid 1800s, had migrated from the Bay Area because he had some health condition to the Big Island and founded Kona coffee there. Beautiful postcard, wish I had it. The Hawaiian Pineapple Pickers Association. So from what you saw, what do you think the reactions were of prominent Hawaiian businessmen and media who visited this? Any guesses? Well, let me show you. One Honolulu business, I feel disgusted at the lack of attractions and the absence of anything adequately advertised in the territory. Lauren Andrews, a prominent attorney. Rotten, rank, and a disgrace to the islands, and nothing more than a collection of dead fish, because they did have, some dead fish, different tropical varieties on display. And then the Honolulu Star Bulletin, singing boys and painted fish, not enough. Now, any guesses what you think mainlanders thought of this?
Mm-hmm.
One of the most popular exhibits at the exposition. Sparked the ukulele craze that swept the United States. All out of San Francisco, all out of the Pan-Pacific Exposition. So now for some concluding thoughts. So I discussed a number of key connections, late 19th century, early 20th century. Klaus Spreckels and his sugar commercial connection. San Francisco is a source of merchandise for the islands. Shipping and tourism through the Spreckels brothers and William Matson. And the military connection through the Presidio and the Port of San Francisco and the exhibitions. There was a gradual waning of this exclusive San Francisco-Hawaii relationship. Ownership of the sugar business passed from Klaus Spreckels to Alexander and Baldwin Company in Honolulu, and they were part of the Big Five Hawaiian companies. I believe they were sons and grandsons of the missionaries. And those Big Five came to dominate the economy of Hawaii, the territory of Hawaii. Alexander and Baldwin gained a controlling interest in 1898 of Spreckels Sugar Company. And in 1905, Alexander Baldwin and other Big Five companies took control of the California and Hawaii Sugar Company, C&H, which, if you've ever been to Crockett, you know there's a factory there. And they also moved the business back to Honolulu in terms of the company. Also, the waning of the relationship in the 20th century happened with the development of other large ports along the West Coast, such as Seattle, Los Angeles, that made the Hawaii commercial and tourist relationship a bit less exclusive to San Francisco. So this strong relationship that I talked about, 1876 to 1916, started with a lot of sugar cane, a lot of vinegar, Klaus Spreckels. And it was transformed into one that had to do with tourism, with the growth of the Madison luxury lines, which became especially heavily promoted in the after 1930. So I have one more slide that I'd love to show you. So this is Spreckels San Francisco office building. So the Spreckels had this real competitive relationship with the DeYoungs. And this particular building was built in 1898 on the left, 703 Market Street, Market and 3rd, was known as the Klaus Spreckels or Call Building because, not to be undone by the DeYoungs, Klaus Spreckels also bought a newspaper called the San Francisco Call. And what was most important about this building to the Spreckels is it was taller than the DeYoung building. And it's still there today, but extensively remodeled and now known as the Central Tower Building. It's hard to kind of recognize as being the original Call Building. So thank you very, very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Bravo.
Any questions?
Thank you, Harold.
Thank you.
Welcome.
The other thing about the Call Building, the Spreckels Building, is that it was completely gutted in the 1906 fire, which is part of why it was remodeled so extensively.
Harold, just a couple of things, just as a sort of a sidelight. I belong to a place called the Marin Rod and Gun Club here in San Rafael, which is right at the base of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge when you come into Marin coming from Richmond.
Huh.
And that club inherited the 26 acres there from C&H Sugar for something like $100. But the reason it was built was because when C&H built their refinery in Crockett, they didn't realize that they didn't have a fresh water supply to do the refinery of the sugar. So they paid for expanding the dams in Marin. There was 3 lakes at the time. They expanded the size of the dams and then ran a spur line from Ross Valley over to that pier that you can see when you come across the bridge. And they had 4 large barges that they would bring on a rotational basis and fill with fresh water to take over to the refinery in order to refine the sugar with fresh water. And they did that all the way up until something like 1926 or 28. I have to go back and look, until they got East Bay mud. But prior to that time, they built a factory where they couldn't refine sugar. Just so you know, because you're talking about the putting in the canal, and I figured adding the canal and then building a factory where they didn't have fresh tied together.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
This is Chris from the Attic in Tiburon.
Yeah. Hi, Chris.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. Good
I
to
have
see
one
you
other
again.
question for you, Harold.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't think to put it on my computer, but many, many years ago, I bought what I think is a test stamp for the Hawaiian $50.
Wow.
A cop or bronze piece that's rectangular actually, and the reverse is rotated from the front, but it's very, very clear. And I've never seen one before, and I can't find anything about it anywhere. Have you ever seen one?
No, no.
Well,
That's
one I've ever ran
wonderful.
across, and it was one of those things I don't even remember where I bought it at. I must have bought it like 10 years ago, and it was just
Wow.
interesting because it was at the time when I was buying all the rest of the Hawaiian coins.
Huh. Well, I bought my Hawaiian quarter from Chris. Maybe
Hey,
it's-
Harold.
Yeah.
Harold,
Yes.
I started in the coin business in Mill Valley in 1976. And we could not believe the amount of Hawaiian quarters that came through that shop over the years.
Yeah.
And the stories that come out that somebody had a friend that worked at the mint. And one guy came in one day with 2 rolls of uncirculated Hawaiian quarters, unopened. And we bought those rolls, and I was only 17. I was able to buy 2 of those coins from the dealer that I worked for. But there's a lot of Hawaiian quarters floating around the Bay Area. Friends at the mint.
Yep.
Huh. By the way, I didn't show, plantation tokens from other plantations, but there are some. I don't know if anyone is a collector of Hawaiian tokens, plantation tokens.
I have a couple, but only a couple. I didn't really work on trying to collect those. I was more interested in the actual coins, except for I've never been able to find a penny that I thought was worth what they were asking for.
Yeah, they were extensively cleaned, weren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Thank you again, Harold. That was really fascinatingly wonderful. I felt like
you.
I went to Hawaii for a little while.
Thank you.